San Francisco 49ers, Los Angeles Rams, everything you need to know for your fantasy teams and player picks in 15 minutes. If you've never been here before, welcome. My name is Max. I make these for every single primetime game and every game on Sunday, giving you a unique edge, looking at run scheme metrics, coverage data, and statistical trends that not a lot of people talk about because it relates to the scheme behind the game of football and not just the numbers you see on your screen. Without further ado, let's get into it. As always, there's a link in the description for all of my picks on my socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Make sure you're locked in on there. And if you're new, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of this stuff throughout the season. Looking at this game, the Rams are a touchdown favorite. We got on them 5.5 about 2 days ago. Truthfully, I still like them at 6.5. I think this is a borderline blowout. I love the way both sides of the ball on the Rams are playing. The total, not touching it. We'll talk that in a second here. However, we got to talk 49ers defense. This is a wildly different unit without Nick Bosa. They run the 10th most zone and were very balanced when Nick Bosa was in the lineup. 3.7 yards per carry. That's a damn good number. And just over 100 rush yards per game allowed. In terms of zone versus man gap scheme runs, pretty balanced. But look, they were good in both of them. This run defense was good with Nick Bosa. He's obviously a good run defender, but it presents a lot of other challenges for offensive lines. Adjustments, shifts, protection plans, things like that. Now, they don't have that. They run 10% less zone, but a similar percentage of man-to-man. What does that mean? They're blitzing more. They have to manufacture pressure by sending an extra guy because you can't get home with Nick Bosa. That's the bottom line. You got to send an extra guy because Nick Bosa is not there. They're playing less middle field closed and more middle field open. Very interesting. A little more shell, but more cover 4, really, which keeps the integrity of a, quote, too high defense with the safeties a little closer to the box. But look at this. 4.72 yards per carry. That's a full yard per carry more without Nick Bosa. They gave up 151 yards to Jacksonville last week. But look at this. This is what I want to talk about, right? Zone yards per carry. Obviously, man gap goes up over a full yard too. 3.79 before the Bosa injury, 7.27 last week against Jacksonville. Obviously, Travis Etienne had the big run, but that's not the only zone run they saw. 7 yards per carry in the zone run. Here's where the issues arise for the 49ers. The Rams, when they run the ball, run it at the 11th highest rate in that zone schemed world. They also have the 5th highest zone yards per carry in the NFL. What does that mean? I think the Rams are going to have a lot of success on the ground. Kyren Williams is the workhorse. He's had at least 60 yards in every single game this season. You like Kyren Williams, you do. However, Blake Corum has a higher zone run percentage and a higher zone yard per carry. Now, I'm not going to say the Rams are going to blow them out. These spreads exist for a reason. I think they're going to win the game. I think they're going to control the clock. Every single week with Blake Corum in the lineup, his carry count has increased. It's increased. And when you go look at the snap counts for the Los Angeles Rams, we'll scroll up here for a second. It's very interesting to look at the running back position because Kyren Williams, his snap count is very slowly decreasing. Blake Corum, 22 snaps last week, almost 30%. 2 weeks prior to that, 30%. Blake Corum is becoming more prominent in this offense. And when you look at the scheme behind where Blake Corum succeeds, it matches up very nicely with this 49ers defense right now. If Blake Corum is getting 7, 8, 9 touches, which I think he will in this game at least, I love his comparative projections, which we'll talk about at the end. In terms of what the Niners defense did without Nick Bosa in 2024, they gave up 2 100-yard rushers in 3 games and 35-plus points in 2 or 3 games. So if you didn't know already, there's a lot of issues for this 49ers defense without Nick Bosa, and it goes even farther in the overall defensive statistic category outside of just the run game. So you look at the target rates. I found no dramatic changes with or without Nick Bosa in terms of where the Niners allow targets to go defensively. However, there was a slight uptick in tight end targets and out wide wide receiver targets. Now, in terms of out wide, the Rams are going to throw there. They're throwing at the 10th highest rate in the league. Puka Nacua is having an unbelievable season, on pace for 2,000 yards. His line, I think, right now is 100.5. Like, if you want to get on that, be my guest. If you have him on your fantasy team, you're obviously starting him. However, the inline stuff is very interesting because the Rams are throwing there at a top 10 rate, the 8th highest rate. That's this 8 number here. And the Niners are allowing targets there at the 3rd highest rate in the NFL. Now, there's no big data outlier that says tight ends are wildly productive against the 49ers, but you go look at Brenton Strange and what he did last week to them without Bosa, there was a lot of success there. Last Thursday night, we hit our parlay. Looking at AJ Barner, putting him for 10 plus yards. Truthfully, in our entry this week, which is on my socials, make sure you check it out, will be on my socials Thursday at noon. It's not out yet. Tyler Higbee is going to be in there. He has the most routes, the most targets, and the most snaps from the inline position. However, Allen has the higher targets per out run. And then you look at Cole Parkinson has the highest targets per out run. So the bottom line with the Los Angeles Rams and all this stuff is you can't really confidently lean into a tight end outside of a watered down leg and maybe a touchdown. I think the Rams are going to put up some points in this game. If you want to go Higbee, Allen, Parkinson, touchdown, be my guest. You can't confidently lean into them, but if you're looking for an extra leg, I feel comfortable adding a watered down pick there. In terms of the red zone data, Higbee and Allen each with 2 targets. But as we know, as anybody with Puka Nacua in fantasy might know, or Devontae Adams fantasy, Devontae is dominating red zone targets. He has 7 more red zone targets than anybody else on the roster. Devontae is going to demand the ball in the red zone. He's probably going to get the ball in the red zone. I really like Devontae Adams in terms of what he can offer this this offense, as well as the matchup nightmares he'll present for the defense across from him. In terms of the comparative projections, the 3 things I am on right now: Blake Corum rush yards, which at the time I'm recording is 26.5. Kyron Williams rush yards, which at the time I'm recording, I believe is 64.5 or 63.5. And the Rams team total, it's a 26.5. I love them to score at least 27 points in this game. I really like this Rams offense against the 49ers defense. Like I said, that is wildly different without Nick Bosa. This data is huge. Let's move to the Rams defense. In terms of their data outliers, I am a little worried about McCaffrey's production, but everybody's banged up. I think he's going to touch the ball that much that it almost doesn't matter. They're giving up the fewest running back receptions, the fewest running back receiving yards. In terms of the overall run data, sorry, this should be yards per game, not yards per carry. They're giving up less than 75 yards per game. So I don't think it really matters leaning into Christian McCaffrey between rush and receiving production. I don't think there's a huge difference there. However, they run a ton of zone. And when you run a ton of zone, running backs are going to get targets, tight ends are going to get targets, and it's the 10th most middle field closed. So that's a ton of cover 3. When they're running the zone, it's cover 3, which again, most cover 3s in a world will throw a flat defender 8 to 10 yards down the field. So if Brock Purdy, whoever's quarterback, it sounds like it's going to be Brock Purdy, is reading high to low, it's not their high, check down to Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey's going to produce. That's the reality of it. And in terms, again, backfield target rate, we'll talk that in a second. He's going to get the ball wherever he's lined up, whether it's in the backfield or in the slot. Now, I went really in depth for you guys on target rates in 2 ways. Right now, at the time I'm recording, it sounds like Brock Purdy is playing. However, I went in depth and looked at the different target rates with Mac Jones in the lineup, as well as the slot reps, which we'll talk about why slot in a second, with no Juwan Jennings, with Juwan Jennings in the lineup, what happened when him and Persall were both hurt last week, and overall numbers. So when you look at the target rates, the Rams defense is allowing the 2nd most targets in the slot. Usually that's really good information. I still think it is good information. For whatever reason, Brock Purdy, when he is quarterback in the Niners offense, comparatively, the lowest offensive slot target rate in the NFL. When Mac Jones is in, it's the 7th highest. But when Purdy's in, it's the lowest, which is crazy. Now, when you go look at the slot, which is really the only place I want to lean into in terms of the Niners pass game right now, when Juwan Jennings is out, Ricky Persall has the most routes and targets. Oddly enough, Sky Moore had the 2nd most. Kendrick Bourne had the 3rd most. Remember that. With Juwan Jennings, he is the slot guy. Most routes, most targets. Jake Tunge is behind him at 2. In week 4 last week, when everybody was banged up, hurt out, Kendrick Bourne ran the most routes from the slot guys. However, this is where it gets crazy. Overall, across all 4 weeks, all injuries aside, or taken into account, I guess, Ricky Persall and Christian McCaffrey had the most targets from the slot. In terms of the highest percentage of their routes from the slot, it was Kendrick Bourne. In terms of the highest team percentage, so in terms of overall routes the 49ers are running from the slot, Jake Tunges had the highest. What does all this mean? This is super confusing, guys. And if I am getting on this game, I am leaning into Christian McCaffrey, the best player, maybe Brock Purdy, and then the rest are the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I will tell you, at the time I'm recording, it seems like everybody's questionable for this game. Injury news will come out. It could come out while I'm recording this. Everything will be pinned in the comments here as well as on my social. That's why it's important to stay active on this. Let's talk very quickly comparative projections here. 3 things I do like. Again, McCaffrey, truthfully, I'm on anytime touchdown. It's almost even at this point. Purdy's going to throw the ball a ton. If you're looking for a watered down leg, 200 plus is great. I don't love straight 235.5. And look, if the Niners are going to throw the ball, which they're probably going to have to do, a garbage time touchdown to Jake Tunges, who, again, highest percentage of team routes from the slot. He had multiple targets with second most targets with Juwan Jennings from the slot in the lineup. Jennings plays that increases that a little bit. Like, I think he could have enough volume. But the bottom line here is the Niners are extremely confusing because there have been so many injuries, so many revolving doors in the offense, whereas the Rams get a really good defensive matchup without Nick Bosa, will be able to run the ball, I think, extremely well. Blake Corum, potentially in a blowout, could have some big, big runs as well. Kyren Williams is the workhorse. I'm leaning into the Rams, running the football, and truthfully blowing this thing open. I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you listening. If you're new, make sure you subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed. There will be a full Sunday breakdown out for you on Friday, depending on when you're seeing this. God bless you guys.